In part 2 of this one-part series, we looked at Phillip Goff's essay announcing his conversion to Christianity. In this video, we're going to look at Goff's conversation about that conversion with Cameron Bertuzzi from the Capturing Christianity channel, which includes a lot of additional detail. Guys?
I never thought a few years ago I'd end up a Christian. But as you say, what I've ended up with is maybe quite an unusual form of Christianity. I don't believe in the virgin birth. I don't believe in an all-powerful God. I think the Bible is wrong about a lot of stuff. And I'm very uncertain whether it's all true.
Boy, Philip and I have a lot in common. I don't believe in the virgin birth or an all-powerful God, and I think the Bible gets a lot of stuff wrong too. I suspect we'd both agree about the age of the earth, original sin, the Garden of Eden story, and the Exodus as well. Wait, am I a Christian?
You know, the classic argument against God is arguing against a very particular form of God, what we call the omni-God, all-knowing, all-powerful, perfectly good. But the arguments for God, or at least the fine-tuning argument for God, is arguing for something much more generic, something God-ish, just some kind of purpose or goal-directedness in the early universe. So I realize if you go for something God-ish, but you don't go for the omni-God, then you can sort of have your cake and eat it.
So Phil has figured out how to have his cake and eat it. A phrase which usually is reserved for those who want it all without consequences or negative repercussions or even honesty. Sounds like we are really walking that straight and narrow road to intellectual integrity. Yes, if you whittle down Christianity to nothing more than a kind of powerful enough deist kind of God who kind of cares about us also sometimes, maybe, you can have your theological cake and eat it too. But that cake is now without any nutritional value whatsoever. It's nothing but empty calories, which explains Goff's momentary sugar high and the ability to promote his book to a wider audience. Let's give him some points for that.
But I guess my position is there is a position, I think, a middle way position that accounts for all the data. And that is the hypothesis of a God of limited power.
Okay. So that's the only limitation that you would include. Is that, do I have that correct?
Yeah, a good God of limited power, I think is
But unlimited in goodness, unlimited in knowledge as well?
Yeah.
So the question, unanswered in his essay, is finally answered here. Goff still imagines an all-knowing, all-loving God, but his God is limited in his power. This answers the traditional problem of evil. There is evil in the world because God is not powerful enough to stop it. But removing God's omnipotence while leaving God's omniscience and omnibenevolence doesn't answer Pine Creek Doug's real problem of evil. Goff's God still knew with absolute certainty that there would be holocausts and torturers and child rapists, aka priests, etc., if he created. And yet, God still created, knowing his impotence would not be able to stop these horrors. So God's unlimited goodness includes creating a world filled with Den.
This life is filled with an immeasurable amount of injustice and suffering.
That is neither having your cake nor eating it. Perhaps the larger question is, what exactly is limiting Goff's God? How is it, or who is it that is limiting the power of this being? Does he just not like working out? Did he find a rock he created that's so big he can't lift it? If there will be a heaven without evil, will Goff's God get his power back at the stroke of midnight or something? How and why is Goff's God limited?
One way of putting the challenge of the problem of evil is, why would a good God who can do anything choose to create life through the gruesome, torturous process of evolution by natural selection, right? But if God is not all-powerful, maybe God didn't have much choice, right? Maybe the only way God can create intelligent life is by creating a world, a universe with the right physics that will eventually evolve intelligent life. And God's like, I know it's going to be messy. I'm sorry. I wish it could be another way, but it's that or nothing.
At which point God's all-knowingness and all-goodness kick in, and he says, it's got to be nothing. Because my goodness will be absolutely destroyed if I create a place filled with den.
This life is filled with an immeasurable amount of injustice and suffering.
And then place sentient creatures into that environment without their consent and without any power to control or alleviate the evil. I must first and foremost do no harm. Good doesn't knowingly create evil. By the way, this is what a PhD in philosophy will get you, my friends. If you have $100,000 you're looking to throw away.
I think it cuts both ways, right? It's like, I just sort of feel like atheists are tying themselves up in knots trying to deal with fine-tuning. Theists are trying to tie themselves up in knots dealing with suffering. Look, there's a hypothesis on the table here that avoids all these difficulties. What's the problem?
The problem, Phil, is that all you have is an hypothesis. It's a theory, and not a theory in the way science uses that word. Nor has your hypothesis solved the real problem of evil. That God created this mess filled with den.
This life is filled with an immeasurable amount of injustice and suffering.
Knowing he'd be creating this mess and forcing sentient beings who could suffer those injustices into it. Now, if in your hypothesis you want to get rid of God's unlimited goodness as well, then you might be onto something. Additionally, there are those of us out here without PhDs in philosophy, admittedly, for whom more is required. And hypothesis is the starting point from which we can and should draw no conclusions without the evidence needed to confirm said hypothesis. None of this talk gets us any closer to even establishing the existence of a God, good or otherwise. And since you're whittling away at the original God hypothesis in order to make it fit the data of reality, and clearly haven't thought things through enough to realize that you have to get rid of a second omniproperty, omnibenevolence, to actually make your God fit the data, your efforts are as compelling and plausible as an M. Night Shyamalan film.
I was quite happily in Team Atheist for 20 years, but I think I've always been a spiritual person. You know, I guess I was in the team of spiritual but not religious, and I feel like I was happy with that. I didn't feel there was a God-shaped hole in my life. I suppose really it's been an intellectual journey. You know, for me, it has to make intellectual sense first.
Well, keep trying, Phil. Keep thinking. You'll get there one day. I have faith in you. But this shit ain't gonna cut it. Well, that's all the time we have for this video. In part 1 of this 7-part series, we'll look at penal substitution, the goal of existence, and how easy it is to believe when you embrace Low-Bar Bill's lowered epistemological standards. Until then, I'm me. Thanks for watching.